Moving on to step 2 is forming research questions. So once you have selected your topic later on, you're going to be forming research questions, and let's talk about what those are going to look like. So first of all, we've got 2 types of research questions. The first is the central research question. So that's at the top, and everything else is working toward answering that central question. This is what you will ultimately answer to draw conclusions from your research and develop a solution. So think of it as like, this is the funnel that everything is going into, and what comes out is your solution, your proposed solution. The first step when generating your central research question is to first understand the problem. So you need to get background information so you have, you've oriented yourself and you have some context about the issue before you can start figuring out what you need to know and what has already been done to solve that problem in order to develop your own solution. So you're going to answer questions like, what are the causes and consequences? Who is affected and how? What solutions have already been attempted, and what gaps or challenges still exist? The second step is then to form the central research question. So now that you have some background information, you're focusing on proposing a solution. So what can be done to fix that problem? It needs to be open-ended, which means it cannot just be answered with a simple yes or no. Like, is youth homelessness bad? That is a yes or a no. And it needs to be clear, concise, and researchable. So it needs to be broad enough that you are able to answer it, but narrow enough that you're able to actually find a solution. And you'll work with your research group and with me to kind of hash that part out. Some examples of central research questions are, how can community-based programs reduce youth homelessness in urban areas? So we're looking at what the topic is, who is affected, youth homelessness, and then what can be done about it. What strategies can improve mental health support for college students or high school students or teenagers? And how can renewable energy adoption be accelerated in low-income communities? So these are open-ended questions. They're focused enough that we could find answers and propose a solution to these issues. And I have provided a template that you may use if you need to, so that you can just kind of fill in these blanks to at least get started if you need that help. So what is your specific social issue, and like all of the facets of that social issue, be addressed to improve? What are you hoping to achieve to improve, or what group are you hoping to help? The next types of questions are the guiding questions. So you'll have one central question and multiple guiding questions that help break down that central question into smaller focused facets to guide your investigation and help narrow your focus. So these are the questions that you'll actually be plugging into a search engine. In this section, I didn't provide any blanks for you to fill in guided notes because it's a lot of writing, so I thought it would be easier to just provide it for you, but that doesn't mean you don't need to pay attention to what I'm saying. There are going to be some vocabulary that I use in this section that you may be unfamiliar with, but you're going to be responsible for knowing what it is. So if you don't know what a word like contextual means, make sure you're jotting down some notes, annotating your notes as I explain what these things are. So the first category is contextual. This is where you are orienting yourself, providing background information for yourself so you know where in history this problem started, who is being affected. Basically you're summarizing the issue, right? So some questions to think about are, what are the historical and social factors that contribute to this issue, and how has this issue evolved over time? So when did it start? How did it start? Who's affected? How has that changed over time? An example could be, what housing policies have influenced the rise in youth homelessness? The next category is the stakeholder questions. So stakeholders are people that are affected by the issue. So these could be the people who have the negative impact. This could be people who work to solve this problem. You yourself are a stakeholder because you are invested in this and you're trying to find a solution to it. So some questions to ask would be, who are the key stakeholders and what are their perspectives? So what's their point of view? What's their experience like? And how are different communities affected? So like, how is the Hartford area affected versus another city in the state? If you're using a, like local or regional issue. How is the United States affected versus how is another country affected, right? Or how are these two countries affected versus how another set of countries have been affected? That way you can start getting some ideas for what has been tried before and worked or not worked so that you can work towards your solution. Examples are what is the average age of homeless minors and who is impacted by youth homelessness? Because this is going to drive your research in a certain direction. Because if the average age of homeless minors is 8 years old, that's going to be very different than if the average age of homeless minors is 17, who are about to be adults and then be responsible for themselves. So that will help you guide the rest of your research. Solution-oriented questions are exactly what they sound like. So think about what solutions have been attempted before and how effective were they. So what aspects of the previous solutions worked and what didn't. And then what best practices could be adapted from other regions or fields. So what can I replicate here in the area that I am addressing, or what should I not do because it's already not worked for someone else? And examples of this are how have bigger cities in Connecticut addressed youth homelessness? So I looked it up, and Bridgeport and Stamford both have larger populations than Hartford do. So I could look at those two cities and see how have they addressed youth homelessness, what works there, what hasn't worked there. And the last type of question is implementation questions. So once you've kind of started getting ideas about solutions, what are you going to need to have in order for this to work? So how much money or manpower is needed? What kind of partnerships? So are there like nonprofit organizations? Is this something that schools can help out with? Like what stakeholders are going to need to be involved in order for the solution to be implemented? And then what challenges might arise, like funding and staffing. What other problems might you run into with those resources that are needed? And an example for implementation is how much does it cost to provide public housing for homeless youth? Because that will help us decide, what kind of stakeholder, what kind of community support will be needed in order to provide that amount of money in order to provide the housing for homeless youth. I look forward to seeing what issues you guys brainstorm and what you find out and how we can start proposing solutions to these problems.